So recently, the Great Pyramid gave up a secret that had been hiding in plain stone the whole time. Not a rumor passed around a forum, a measurement. High-energy scans saw through the rock and outlined a long, empty space sitting above the Grand Gallery like a shadow inside a mountain. A void, real volume, real shape. That single fact flips the frame, because stone does not forget to exist by accident. Somebody left that space there on purpose. And when you pull on that thread, the entire building starts telling a different story. Not just a tomb, not just a solid pile, a system with moving parts in time. Empty on purpose is a design choice. Let me say what that means in clean terms. There is a corridor inside the pyramid called the Grand Gallery. It is tall and steep and lined with slots and ledges like a staircase stretched into a throat. The scans show a separate space above that gallery, long, sealed, unreachable by any known passage. If you have ever built anything heavy, you know this trick. You carve voids to manage force. You leave space where weight wants to crack something. You build cavities to stage materials, to slide counterweights, to let heat or gas escape, to tune the way a room vibrates. That is the first honest read. The people who made this thing were not just stacking blocks. They were shaping emptiness. The north face holds another clue that points the same way. Look above the original entrance and you see a pair of big stone triangles locked together like shoulders. Builders call that a chevron. Behind those chevrons there is a pocket, a smaller cavity tucked right at the brow of the whole monument. That pocket and the big void line up with the axis that runs through the entrance, the passages, and the king's chamber. The spine of the building has a rhythm of stone, then space, then stone again. It is like a lung. Inhale, exhale. Not literally, but structurally. It breathes load, it breathes heat. Drop inside and walk the known routes in your mind. You come in low through a cramped descending passage. You meet a junction. One branch keeps going down into the bedrock under the pyramid where there is a rough-cut subterranean chamber. Another branch angles up to the so-called Queen's Chamber. A third continues up to the Grand Gallery and then to the so-called King's Chamber. Every one of these spaces carries clues that most tours skip in a rush to hit the highlights. The subterranean chamber is hacked out like work, not like ceremony. It has a pit and a trench and unpolished walls. A workroom, a place you use while you are building something else. The Queen's Chamber is finished, quiet, centered on the core. It has two small shafts that run out from its walls and then stop behind little limestone doors with copper pins set into them. The King's Chamber is different again. It is granite from top to bottom, hauled from quarries far to the south, locked with huge beams above it in stacked layers called relieving chambers. Those layers bleed load into the core. They are the reason that room is still perfect while everything around it has settled. Now focus on the Queen's Chamber for a second, because those small shafts are one of the strangest features in the whole building. They are too narrow for a person. They are angled toward the outside but do not go all the way. People sent small robots up one of them decades ago and found a door. They drilled a tiny hole and found another door a little farther. Between them there were red marks on the stone and a view of copper. Whatever those pins did, they were not decoration. Copper is a conductor and a spring and a handle and a lock depending on how you use it. Those little doors may have been valves, not for water, for air, for incense, for sound, for pressure relief when temperatures changed, for something that had to be released or sealed in a certain order, and that leads back to the big void above the gallery. Doors and pins down low, a big airless cavity up high. The building reads like a circuit you have not decoded yet. Pivot to the Grand Gallery. Even in photos, you can see cuts in the side ledges, regular, repeating. The floor is steep, the ceiling narrows as it rises. People have argued about those cuts for a long time. They look like seats for beams. They look like racks for sliding timbers. If you lay stout wooden frames across those cuts and lash them together, you get a ladder inside a stone channel that could carry a heavy weight up or down in controlled steps. If you anchor a heavy sledge at the top and stage it on rollers, you can let it down or haul it up using ropes, beams, and gravity itself as your engine. To build a roof of granite beams above the King's Chamber, you would need something like that. To fine-tune the positions of blocks while the casing climbed, you would need something like that. And when the work was done, you would want the engine sealed away, Scrape out the timbers, lower the last frames, pull the lines. The stone throat remains, the cuts remain, the ghosts of moving parts remain, but the machine is gone. What is left behind in that case is a chamber of silence above it where the strain used to live. That chamber is the void the scans see. Walk into the king's chamber now and listen with your body. The proportions are not an accident. Granite sings when you tap it. The beams above sit in stacks with gaps between them. Those gaps break up the way sound and stress move through the roof. Stand in the center and your chest picks up a low hum if someone speaks. If you are skeptical of anything mystical, keep it simple. Every room has resonances. This one is designed to control them, not for music, for survival. A block 3 men long across your head wants to crack when the entire mass of the pyramid presses down and the temperature cycles for centuries. Those relieving spaces and the voids around them take the hit and spread it out. There is a ladder of facts here that are not controversial. The builders were engineers. They chose materials on purpose. Limestone outside and for most of the core because it is light, workable, and reflective when polished. Granite in stress zones and in the important chambers because it is strong and stable and it locks like a vise when you stack beams the right way. Casing stones on the outside that once flashed in the sun and shed heat at night, turning the whole thing into a stable thermal mass. Narrow passages that regulate temperature and pressure simply by being narrow and by the way they are oriented. This is not a guess. This is what stone does. And when you add the hidden void to that list, the picture sharpens. Space is a tool in this toolbox. The obvious pushback is that it is still a tomb, and there is nothing wrong with that word as long as it does not shut the door on function. A tomb for a king in that world is not a closet with a box. It is a machine for crossing between states. Stone to hold up the sky, passages to guide the soul, stars aligned to anchor a story about eternity. Does that mean the star-sighting shafts in the king and queen's chambers were only symbolic? No. They can be both. They can ventilate for workers during construction, they can bleed heat during the day and pull cool night air in, and they can be aimed in a way that locks the building into the sky lore of the time. Practical and poetic are not enemies when a culture builds for both worlds. Take the alignment question. The big passages track close to the cardinal directions. The base is squared more precisely than many modern projects manage with cheap tools. That kind of accuracy comes from long baselines and patient checking. You do not do that for a sloppy purpose. You do that because everything above depends on everything below being true. And if you are going to set sacred alignment to the heavens on top of that, you make sure the bones are straight. People love to argue about which stars the small shafts point to and in which era, because precession slowly moves the sky. Pick your preferred chart and you still land on the same point. Alignment mattered. It was encoded. It was measured. It was not random. There is a detail tucked above the king's chamber that people who want a purely mystical story try to skip. The relieving spaces are rough, but full of human fingerprints, red quarry marks, crew names, work instructions. Those were not carved later by a forger sneaking into a place he could not reach without breaking blocks. Those are genuine construction marks. They tell you this is old kingdom work with teams, logistics, checklists, and pride. The existence of those marks does not deflate the mystery, it grounds it. It tells you the same people who wrote their crew names took stress off the roof with a 5-layer granite sandwich and likely timed their lifts with a counterweight system in the grand gallery. Those mines also left a long, sealed space up above. They did not do that by accident. Go back to the Queen's chamber and those little doors. Copper pins, limestone leaf, a tiny gap in between. When you think of a door, you think of a hinge and a handle. These are more like shutters in a pipe. They could have been set and then hidden once the work was done. They could have been opened during a ritual sequence and then closed. They could have been the end points of narrow ducts packed with something fragrant that had to release at a costed pace during a ceremony. And if the ducts needed to be dry, warm, and free of drafts between seasons, a sealed void higher up in the mass would help keep the pressure curve gentle. Again, stone and space doing work together. The entrance side of the pyramid adds one more thread. The chevrons are not decoration. They spread load around a weakness. When you open a big hole in a wall that carries weight, you build an arch or a truss over it. The builders used giant limestone arms locked against each other to make that truss. Behind it is a pocket. And above all of that, running back into the core, sits the big hidden space the modern scans mapped. It is consistent. Reinforcement where stress concentrates. Void where stress needs to bleed off. Redundancy in case a block settles badly after 1,000 summers. People love to ask why anyone would go to this trouble if the end result was a single burial. The answer is simple. If you have ever been in a room where a culture plans for eternity, permanence was the point. Permanence cost planning. If your grand chamber collapses 2 generations later, the contract you made with your people and with your gods is broken. So you add layers, you plan escapes, you include kill switches that let builders get out, and then close the last passage behind them. You use small ducts for air while the work is hot, and then plug them with doors once the inside no longer needs to breathe in human time. You leave space above a gallery to keep the assembly from failing. You overbuild one room with granite beams and then overbuild the support above that room with more beams and air gaps. That is expensive. It is also exactly what you do when failure is not an option. There is a modern temptation to settle on a single clever theory for the whole building. Internal ramps only, water power only, resonance machine only, ancient power plant only. The truth is likely what master builders always do. Mix methods. Use ramps outside for early courses and inside for later ones. Use sledges and water and rope and patience and a gallery that doubles as a hauling engine. Use thermodynamics and sound the same way we do today without needing words we invented in the last few centuries. And if a byproduct of that well-tuned structure is that certain tones hang in the king's chamber, or that air drafts in a slow daily pulse through a shaft, you can fold those effects into your ritual life, because your ritual life is built on the behavior of the world, not separate from it. Let's talk scale for a minute, because it puts the void in proportion. The pyramid used to be dressed in polished casing stone. That skin reflected light, sealed joints, and took a beating from wind and sun, so the core did not. Remove that skin as later builders did, and the core breathes differently, cracks open, edges round. But the interior, especially the granite rooms with their limestone buffers, stayed stable. The hidden space above the grand gallery adds more insurance. A stone mountain moves a tiny bit every day as the sun warms one face and the other sits in shade. If you give the most delicate part of your interior a cushion of air rather than more hard rock, the daily movement smooths out. Over centuries, that choice pays you back. There is another path into this that I love because it cuts through the noise. Ask what you would measure if you wanted to test whether the void was structural, symbolic, or part of a building machine. You would take very fine temperature readings across the face that sits over it and compare them to similar spots without a void. You would listen for infrasound in the grand gallery during hot days and cold nights and see if the pattern shifts. You would map tiny ground motions with lasers and see how the core breathes around that space in different seasons. You would model it digitally with the stone dimensions we do know and see whether the void sits where stresses concentrate in your model. In other words, you would treat the building like a living patient. That work is ongoing in a slow, careful way. The results already support the simplest reading. The empty space is not a mistake, it is doing a job. There is one more feature that does not get enough love in this conversation: the subterranean chamber and the rough descending passage. If the pyramid were only about a final room, you would not go to the trouble of cutting a workman's chamber into bedrock and then not polishing it. You would not start a passage that dives below ground and then bend it into an unfinished pit, unless that lower zone was your early stage, your staging area, your place for drainage, your place to park tools and sledges and timbers when the weather hit the top too hard to work, your place to get out of the sun, your place to set the first alignment and then lock it with a permanent line that your crews used for years as they climbed. That lower zone and the gallery above speak to each other like basement and stairwell in any huge project. The hidden cavity above the gallery fits that conversation as the attic you never see but that keeps the whole frame safe. So what is hidden inside? Here is the straight answer: a planned emptiness that is as important as the stone, a cavity that keeps the throat of the building safe, that probably doubled as an access or staging volume during construction, and that was sealed by design once the heavy lifting ended. A smaller pocket at the brow that spreads load around the entrance and whispers the same idea in miniature. a set of small shafts with blocking stones and copper fittings that suggest controlled opening and closing during and after construction. Another set of broader relieving spaces above the main granite room that tell you the builders knew exactly how weight and heat travel. The building is not only a container for a body and a story, it is a device for holding conditions across time. It is a memory of how far a culture could push stone and empty space to do something that felt like forever. You do not have to reach for aliens or lost global tech to be astonished. The thing that should blow your mind is that human hands did this with patient math, good stone sense, an eye for the sky, and a work ethic that did not quit. The hidden space we can finally see with modern instruments is a handshake across 45 centuries. They left it, we found it, and it tells both sides of the story. The practical side that says build smart or your roof will crush your most important room, and the spiritual side that says build a world inside a world, and the person you are burying will never stop traveling. Think about how different the popular story sounds when you include the void. The old version was a solid mountain of blocks with a few tunnels carved through, a heavy dead thing. The updated version is a tuned instrument, thick where it needs to be, thin where it pays to be, open above the most strained element, blocked where drafts would ruin the temperature, vented where crews needed relief before the final seal, braced around the mouth, nested roofs over the heart, and in that design you also get metaphor for free, space above the way up, a quiet loft above the climb. A hidden room only the builder and the gods know about. That is poetry without any woo. It is what happens when practical design touches human meaning. There is a fairness in giving credit where it is due. The teams who hauled those granite beams did not need anyone from the future to whisper tricks to them. If you set up rails in the grand gallery and use gravity as your helper, if you stage counterweights and break them with ropes across wooden frames, you can lift and set every part of that roof. And when you are done, you can dismantle the gear and lower it out in pieces. The only signature left behind is the geometry and the scars in stone that match the job. The void is one of those signatures. Seeing it now is like catching a chalk mark from a carpenter on the backside of an old cabinet. You learn how it was really made. If you want a final clean take to carry out of this, here it is. The Great Pyramid is not what we think when we think solid. It is part stone and part engineered emptiness. The something hidden inside is not a stash of gold or a sci-fi core. It is the deliberate absence that makes the whole work hold together across heat and cold and centuries of settling. It is a safety pocket and a tuning chamber and maybe, for a time, a work loft. And right at the front, behind those big stone shoulders, there is a smaller echo of that idea doing the same job at a different scale. Leave space where it counts. Close it when the job is done. Let the building breathe in ways that make it immortal. That is the story I trust. Not because it is flashy, because it matches how humans build when failure is not allowed. You find the load paths, you relieve the stress, you give the toughest room a cushion the eye cannot see. You hide your scaffolding when the last stone goes in. You align the shell to the sky so the structure serves the myth without breaking the math. And if 5,000 years later someone points a new kind of eye at your work and finds the hollow places, they will finally hear the quiet line you wrote under all the noise. Strength lives in stone and in the spaces between. The hidden thing inside the Great Pyramid is the choice to leave a place for time itself to move without destroying what mattered most.